Okay, welcome to the first unit in the first week of our special topics course in the MBA program, The Catholic Vision of the Good Company. What I want to do is just give you a kind of a basic intro and overview of the course to come. You do have some readings to do, not a lot, and especially you got to focus on, I think, the text which is titled Vocation of the Business Leader, which lays sort of a broader view and a foundational sense so that you see the whole picture as you go in. But to get things going, what I wanted to mention is a guiding ethos to use for the course as you are reading and as you are working through the various topics. I want you to read the Vocation of the Business Leader. One way to think of that text is that it's a pretty good, almost like a bullet point outline of over 100 years of social thought presented to us by the Catholic Church. And one of the big themes of the social thought is that the doctrine intertwines with the vision of human development. And as I bring up this notion of human development and how and why business matters to God, I want to present to you a little bit of intro in terms of bad news and good news, right? Because it turns out, right, in business and in medicine and education, religion, military, politics, there's actually bad news wherever you turn. Of course, there's good news as well. The bad news is often horrific and has wide-ranging effects, right? People in positions of leadership lose their reputations and their positions. They'll face potential civil lawsuits, criminal charges, jail time. The costs, of course, are greater for followers who find themselves caught in a web of darkness. Let's think of some examples, right? So the world still recovers from a global economic crisis. They came about because persons in the financial industry downplayed risks. Many of them engaged in fraud. Think of the millions of cycling fans and cancer victims, disillusioned when Lance Armstrong, the 7-time winner of the Tour de France, has all of his wins vacated due to the blood doping scandal. In the Gulf of Mexico, one of the greatest environmental disasters in U.S. history took place. Leaders at BP made a series of very poor decisions, right? They ignored safety warnings. They had no strategy in place to cap the leaking deep water well. The company is still reeling from this disaster. Owners and managers of a Massachusetts pharmacy seem to have failed to sterilize a pain drug, and they ship this off to hospitals and healthcare providers, and that triggers meningitis. Schools in Pakistan and Afghanistan are undergoing development. The Central Asia Institute founder, working to raise money and to build these schools, his name is Greg Mortensen. He misspent donor funds, and it greatly impeded the ability of persons to develop these schools. And British reporters and private detectives invaded the privacy of murder victims by accessing their cell phones and their voicemails. Think, too, of the 400,000 women caught up in Congo's civil war. In one 12-month period, they were raped, victims of a campaign of sexual terrorism. Or 1,000 Bangladeshi garment workers who die in a factory building. It collapsed the day after it was condemned, yet the company had ordered them back to work. Those 1,000 workers are dead. Now, misery can be caused by leaders because they make bad decisions. This puts at the forefront of their decisions the issue of ethics, really the heart of leadership. And one of the things we're going to try to do in this course is focus on the Catholic vision Can the gospel principles that we have derived from our encounter with Jesus Christ influence our ethics? Now, you're an MBA student. You're going to assume a position of leadership. When you do this, you're going to assume ethical burdens. So we have to figure out ways to act so that we benefit rather than damage other people. A theme I like to think of as casting light instead of shadow. We can find, of course, plenty of cases of leaders who actually have engaged in decision-making that has improved the lives of others. This is the good news. You think of managers and employees at the Fukushima nuclear power plant in Japan. After the tsunami damaged that facility, many of those workers risked radiation exposure to prevent meltdown. Wangari Maathai, she's a Kenyan activist, has developed something called the Green Belt movement, planting trees, fostering economic development and democracy across Africa. Pakistani teenager Malala Yousafzai promotes schooling for girls. The Taliban oppose this. She continues to speak and to lead, yet she has been shot and in other occasions seriously injured by Taliban gunmen. Sudanese billionaire Mo Ibrahim has given a $5 million prize to African leaders if they would just promote democracy, anti-corruption, right? Don't steal public funds, and of course, peacefully leave office. Robert Moore, CEO of Bob's Natural Foods, on his 81st birthday, gave his entire company to his 200 Oregon employees. Teachers at Sandy Hook Elementary School in Newtown, Connecticut, brought their children to safety. The students were being killed by a gunman engaged in a murderous rampage. 6 adults at the school died protecting their children, putting themselves between the students and the gunman. The responders rushed into the building while the killer was shooting. The 8-year-old Mackenzie Snyder started an organization that provides duffel bags with a stuffed animal. They give these to foster children who move from home to home. It helps them pack their belongings. It gives them a sort of sense of continuity. Gary Gensler, chair of the U.S. Commodity Futures Trading Commission, works to bring suit against HSBC, Barclays, and a variety of international financial institutions who manipulated interest rates in the past decade. U.S. Airways pilot Captain Chesley Sullenberger, known as Sully, saved the lives of his entire crew and all passengers, safely landing his damaged airplane in New York's Hudson River. So you can see there's bad news, there's good news. What's the ethos we want? From the point of view of St. Augustine, social doctrine has this guiding ethos. I think it's the heart of the whole doctrine, running from 1890 till now. You don't find this explicitly stated anywhere, but I think it's the overarching guide. Tolle superbium divitiae non nocebent. If you get rid of pride and riches, will then do no harm. Now, I just want to mention, as we read church documents in this area, the church possesses teaching authority. Teaching authority because the church is the mystical body of Jesus Christ on earth. She operates under the New Testament divine law of charity. Under this divine law of charity, the church uses persuasion rather than the rule by coercive force. That's a key issue here. How are we going to be persuaded? We have to read the texts as honestly as possible. Sincerely digest them. Consider them and honestly ask yourself if what is being taught is really the truth and how we might be able to apply it in our lives. The reason I want to do that, sort of self-reflection, is to note that the primary place where we want to obtain information to become leaders who cast light and not shadow is really in the area of judging, the middle of a three-part sequence of our actions, where we see the world around us, formulate judgments about what we see happening, and act on the basis of these judgments. Now, in the document, The Vocation of the Business Leader, from the Pontifical Council, there are a wide variety of passages. They're all numbered. They run from 1 to 87. And the document has an intro phase, and then 3 sections, Seeing, which basically runs from section 15 through 26, a section on Making Judgments, which runs from section 27 to 37, and then from there, Actions, Practical Principles for Business. Embedded in the document as well, you'll see some pillars of the thinking of the church, which, running from Leo XIII in 1891 through today, much of social doctrine is founded upon. These pillars include human dignity, the common good, subsidiarity, which is a special word that indicates the nature of our freedom to solve problems and to act. There's going to be, as well, the notion of solidarity, which guides business leaders in terms of engaging in service toward others. In the Seeing section, you'll note that the document recognizes the complexities we face in our modern world. As business leaders, when you look at the world today, you see prominent issues universally experienced. You have a globalization experience, the spread of financial and physical capital throughout our world, which is granting new freedom to people. You see the communications revolution, which is generating an abundance of information. And we have financialization and commoditization processes that are unfolding in human lives throughout our world. This, of course, creates a variety of challenges for us, and the document seeks to dive into some of these cases that we must become aware of. While doing this, the document highlights the notion of making judgments. The guiding principle of our judgments is our vocation to love. This is the primary gospel principle. In Ephesians 4:15, we discover Paul teaching us that we must teach the truth, but teach the truth in love. Here the section gives rise to the notion of how it is that humans really, truly flourish. Human flourishing being the key criterion, driven by the notions of our inherent dignity and the common good. The document mentions that the principle of human flourishing is what is the key principle we would use when we deploy our judgments. So thus we say, if we're going to reason well and choose freely in accord with that reason, then we would live in a kind of society that is one built upon communion with one another and with God. This is what enables genuine development in our abilities, our virtues, and of course, the ultimate goal, in our holiness. Every single person on planet Earth has transcendent destiny. The document mentions the conditions of the common good and the place of business in this world. Conditions involving the rule of law, property rights, freedom, the notions of public goods, proper currency, fiscal policy, and so on. In terms of practical businesses for us, business principles for us, I think the document's handy in the sense of an ethics movement that developed in the past several decades focused on the notion of corporate responsibility. In the late 90s, early 2000s, a scholar asked a question of the business ethics movement. His question was simple: where are all the Christians? Here we have a document responding to such a question. I encourage you to read sections 38 and go up to about 55 to get the sense of this sort of sequence dedicated to what kinds of actions we would propose. From 57, section 57, to approximately 80, the topic of business as a community of persons, of right action, and of development, the nature of work, and so on, are all, as we said, bullet points that are derived from a variety of documents from the church. In a way, you could think of this document, The Vocation of the Business Leader, as an outline for our course. I take some liberties, of course, focusing our attention on particular topics. Section 81, though, of course, mentions that we face great challenges still, and this is one of the reasons for the course. So that people who have sensed a vocational calling to business can learn to develop faith, hope, and love, the theological virtues, in an atmosphere of formation within our community, within our family, in school, in church, and of course in higher education. The Catholic vision of higher education, as proclaimed in this document, is one which will steer MBA programs away from the notion of technique, which has been quite prominent in the past decades. The calling we see in section 87 is the call to service. There are challenges and opportunities in our world that demand us to make particular kinds of judgments, and we want our judgments to align and be dependent upon the church's social principles, and then we would be leaders who act as if we do serve God. And that, in a way, is the general proclamation of this document. It gives guidance to the whole course. This introduction is the first unit. We're going to work on the church's teachings about the family. Week 3 will deal with the nature of work from the point of view of the Christian. Week 4 is looking at business as a community of persons, so we'll try to add a lot of flesh to the very basic points that are presented in the document. We'll also consider in more deep sense the idea of private property and free markets, where markets are opportunities for riches to be made. But keep in mind Augustine's dictum that if we remove pride, the riches will do no harm. In week 6, we deal with wealth and poverty from the point of view of the church. 7 is a focus on one of your texts, the Catechism for Business, which isn't really, strictly speaking, drawing merely from catechetical sources, but from a wide range of documents. And that's a nice little handbook, so we want to discover what that handbook is like. And then we'll end our course looking at virtuous leadership from the point of view of Havard, quite famous for his text on this topic. Main resources throughout the course are the Vatican documents. I basically link those, but I offered you an optional book at the bookstore, which you could use if you wanted to read the documents in a hard copy format. I'll also put some Blackboard excerpts in place on occasion. Notice, of course, that you primarily rely on the discussion board and your reflection journal for your ongoing work in the course. There is one quiz at the beginning, which is just a simple navigation quiz. It's got a very small contribution to your overall grade, and you will have a final exam. Now, I do reserve the right to throw some more quizzes in the mix, especially if we detect that the depth of reading doesn't seem to be there. Goals for the course is to develop a knowledge of the church's teachings about business and society. Secondly, to challenge your values and your ideas and your beliefs. Try to be critically reflective in a virtuous way. All right, don't beat yourself up, but admit maybe when you're wrong. Especially, one of the things I'm going to try to do in the course is highlight attitudes towards these topics which are prominent in the pagan world. And I mention the pagan world because, according to N.T. Wright, the famous British theologian, the modern West is essentially now pagan. And we might discover, by looking at some of the tenets and precepts of paganism, what kinds of attitudes and processes and structures of society arise from such a vision, compared to the Christian vision, and how it is that Christ intervenes to change that vision, to change the world as a result. Doing this reflection, hopefully we'll discover how we've been influenced by a pagan world around us. One of the characteristics of such a world is the divided life and a disintegrated moral life. And our hope in the course is to move persons more towards the integrated moral life, under the assumption that the integrated moral life of the business leader lays down a foundation for that leader to be able to construct a service for society, a good company, an extraordinary company, we should call it. And of course, we want to recognize that the business values that arise in these local, medium-sized, Fortune 500 international corporations and so on, those business values shape people, they shape culture. But we, as business leaders, will eventually be called upon to shape those businesses and those business values. So this course lays down this foundation to try to teach us the church's view. That's it for now. I'm going to stop recording. Invite you, if you want to put questions in the discussion board. I want you to review basically the layout of the course inside Blackboard and take the quiz, which is just a very simple 15-minute short quiz that it tries to examine what you've learned from navigating around Blackboard, looking at course information, the faculty bio, the learning sessions, and so on. So, God bless everyone and welcome to the course. This is Dr. Welker, piecing this together now and getting it uploaded.